Hey, people of Reddit. So I did something a couple of days back, and I've received a lot of flack for it since. Which is why I wanted to ask you guys if I was the a-hole here. So I was married to my ex-wife for 5 years, but we have been divorced for around a year now. My ex-wife is 33, female, and I'm 35, male. We also have shared custody of our 6-year-old son. My ex-wife and I met at work 8 years ago and fell for each other there. We started dating, and the relationship continued even after I quit my job there and started working someplace else. After 2 years of dating, we decided to get married, and a little after our wedding, we found out we were pregnant. We were happy together with our little family consisting of me, my ex-wife, and my son, but that didn't last long. A couple of years into our marriage, the pressure of work and raising our son started taking its toll on our relationship, but unlike most couples, we were not able to overcome it. The last 2 years of our marriage were pretty much just us ignoring each other as much as we could because we couldn't even hold a conversation if our life depended on it. It would either be pointless small talk or it would end in a fight. So we just stopped talking, and that should have been my signal to leave. But for some reason, I was still holding out hope that things would someday go back to normal. It didn't, and actually got worse because right before we filed for divorce with mutual consent, we had a huge fight, which is what kind of made us both realize that this was over. I don't remember how the fight started anymore. It was probably something about me forgetting to do the dishes from the night before because I'd had to work late. That petty argument blew up into something 10 times bigger, and we said the most horrible things to each other in our anger, which all happened to be what we were really feeling anyway. That fight was what effectively ended our marriage, and we filed for divorce with mutual consent. Our son was thankfully not at home that day and was with my parents because they wanted to take him out for a day. It took him a while to get used to the custody arrangements, but I guess he's a smart kid and understands that his parents don't get along at all and need to be separate to do a half-decent job at raising him and living their own lives. We try to stay together in spite of our marital problems for his sake. But honestly, it's better this way, where at least he doesn't have to watch his parents fight like animals every single day and try to rip each other's heads off or just pretend the other doesn't exist. This is a better choice. My ex-wife and I started living separately right after our last fight and had worked out our own custody arrangement before anything had been finalized by the court, and have continued to co-parent our son since. It was going smoothly until a couple of weeks ago when my ex-wife and I got into another argument, and this time it was about our son. She'd taken him to the bookstore and brought him a bunch of toys and a book that was clearly not age appropriate. She claimed that the book was supposed to be hers and that she'd accidentally let it go with him, but now my son was asking me what a bunch of words meant, which I obviously couldn't tell him because he wasn't supposed to know these words in the first place. He'd gone through the first page of the book, which had a bunch of cuss words, and while he hadn't picked up the other words, he sure had a knack for picking the ones he wasn't supposed to say out loud. These were all cuss words, and my son was saying them all day now, thanks to his mother's carelessness. I told her that she'd been careless and that she needed to be more mindful when she had our son with her. So that turned into a fight because she thinks I have no right to try and teach her how to raise her son, even though I'm his parent too. And as far as I know, I have every right to do this. We got into a massive argument over that, and things were blown out of proportion, so we stopped talking once more, unless it was absolutely necessary. Ever since we separated, we only discussed our son anyway, and now that we were in a fight once more, we weren't talking at all unless we had to discuss it. Like the timings of our son's drop-offs and pickups at our respective homes, or if there were any health concerns regarding him. That's how it's been for the past couple of weeks, and it's been tense and formal, but I've been okay with it. We got divorced for a reason, and the reason was that we simply couldn't get along anymore. So if I was okay with it back then, I was more than okay with it now. It seemed to me, though, that she might have been taking this harder than I was because she'd blocked me on social media, something I hadn't done. She'd also become more and more aggressive whenever she'd drop our son off at my place, and the way she'd act was nothing short of nasty. She wouldn't even look at me, but she'd make sure that she was as aggressive as possible while shoving all my son's belongings towards me whenever she'd bring him over. It was annoying, but I didn't say anything because it wasn't affecting me the way she'd thought it was going to. And I just didn't care what she thought of me anymore. We were done. I'm sure she was getting even more angry that I wasn't giving her a reaction like she wanted, which is what probably led to what happened 3 days back. So I had a work party to go to, and my ex-wife had agreed to look after our son for the evening. I was surprised that she'd agreed because it was the second half of the week, and it was my turn to have him, so I thought she'd relish the opportunity to keep me on my toes and create some trouble for me. But she agreed without any fuss. I dropped our son off at her house, and she took him inside without any of her usual aggression, which she reserved specifically for me, and I was pleasantly surprised because I thought that she was finally choosing to act like a grown-up instead of throwing childish tantrums. After dropping my son off at her place, I started driving towards the venue, but 20 minutes later I received a message from my ex-wife saying that I needed to come to her place ASAP because she had something to tell me about our son. I was already running late, so I decided to ask her if it was really that important, and she said it was just one little thing, but we absolutely had to talk about it in person, and we had to talk about it now. I had no idea what she was going on about. But if it was about our son, I didn't want to leave anything up to chance and decided to drive back to her place and skip the party. It took me another 20 minutes or so to go back, and when I reached her house, I found her gone along with our son. All the lights inside her house were turned out, and her car wasn't parked in the garage either. All that she'd left for me to find out was a note she'd stuck to the door, which said, "Taking our son's name to meet my new boyfriend. Stay mad." I saw red at that point and decided to call her up because there was no way she was this petty and mean. I called her a few times, but she didn't answer, and when I tried to text her, she was still unresponsive. I was standing outside her door in the tux, looking as stupid as I felt, and I knew that I couldn't let her just get away with this, so I decided to do something just as crazy as what she'd done. I decided to ask her mother where she was because I knew for a fact that she always kept her mother updated and informed about her location. I told my ex-mother-in-law that I wanted to surprise her and my son with something really special, and that I needed to know where she was, but without her knowing that I was looking for her. Her mother was naive enough to believe me and send me her location, which happened to be at a nearby restaurant. We'd been to that restaurant a couple of times, and I made my way there within a few minutes. Once I reached, I spotted my son and his mother sitting at a table near the window with another guy, and I felt a surge of anger and annoyance once more. My ex-wife and son had their backs to me, so they didn't see me coming, but the other guy did, and he looked really confused as I made my way to their table and pulled out a chair to sit next to him. When my ex-wife realized what was going on, she looked shocked that I'd found her and started fumbling with her words, but I wasn't there for her. I was there for her new boyfriend. I looked him straight in the eye and started telling him all about what my ex-wife had been up to and revealed just how psychotic she was. I told him about the dirty book she'd accidentally sent our son home with, her weird aggression with me, and of course what she'd done that day. She'd literally made me skip a work event so that she could be petty and create trouble for me by using our son. He looked shocked, and my ex-wife kept trying to speak over me, but I just kept going on and on because all the terrible things just kept coming up like vomit. I was really angry about what she'd done that day, so I didn't stop talking until her so-called boyfriend said that he needed to leave. He practically ran out of there, and by the time that happened, my ex-wife was in tears. My son just looked really confused, and that's kind of the only thing I regret because I didn't want him to feel that way. After her boyfriend ran out on her, we stayed at the table for a couple more minutes while my ex-wife blubbered on about how I'd ruined her relationship. Apparently her boyfriend wasn't aware that she was still co-parenting with me, and I was an active part of her life because she told him that her son's father had passed away and that when her son wasn't with her, he was with her parents. So he had no idea, and now that he'd found out about me, it seemed unlikely that he'd want to come back to her because for 3 months she'd been lying to him. I didn't feel bad for her at all because she'd chosen to lie, and that wasn't my fault. Then she'd chosen to play games with me, just out of pettiness. And this was just the consequences of what she'd done to herself. So she could cry all she wanted to, but I wasn't going to feel bad for her at all. I think she must have been waiting for me to apologize to her or something, but I just sat there silently and watched her cry. So after a couple of minutes of crying, she decided to lunge at me to attack me physically. But luckily, a waiter was there to stop her. Our son was pretty traumatized and we got thrown out and blacklisted from the restaurant. The cops were called and I decided to press charges because she did attack me. And I didn't have any sympathy for her at that point. She was let off with a warning after she was taken to the station, but that just made sure that I'd be filing for full custody of our son. And I even told her about it before blocking her. It's been 3 days since I blocked her number and stuff. I've also spoken to my lawyer and I'm filing for full custody of my son soon. I'm not sorry about what happened because despite everything, I'd always believed that she was at least a decent mother and could have partial custody of our son. But after the incident at the restaurant, I no longer have that opinion. But her mother called me up yesterday to scream at me, and that kind of made me rethink my move. She told me that my ex-wife was very disappointed that I'd chosen to push her to the edge and now was flipping it on her and using her outburst against her to get custody of our son. Apparently, I'd been horrible to her for ages, and now I'd ruined 2 of her most important relationships, her boyfriend and her son. I told my ex-mother-in-law that this was not all my fault, and if anything, she should blame herself for being petty and pushing me to do something so petty, because I'm not the kind of person who usually takes things so far. We had a bit of an argument, and my ex-mother-in-law told me that this was a really cruel thing to do to the mother of my child and that she lost a lot of respect for me. Now, that really hit hard because at the end of the day, no matter what she'd done, she still was the mother of my child. And apart from that one incident, she'd always been a good mom. Even in that instance, I'm not sure if I have the right to say she'd been a bad mother because she'd attacked me out of anger, and after she'd come back to her senses, she'd immediately checked up on how our son was doing while the restaurant manager called the police. She barely even cared about me or even herself, so I can't say she's been a bad mother. A slightly irresponsible one, sure, but not entirely bad or evil. At the same time, I don't know if it's safe for our son to be left alone with his mother now because she has a lot of issues. First, she lied to her boyfriend about my involvement in her life for no real reason because if he was okay with her having a son, then he'd probably be okay with her having an ex-partner. Then she physically attacked me, and even apart from that, there was all the weird aggression with me and the way she seemed to hate me with a passion. There is a strong chance that she might try to turn our son against me in the future, and I can't risk it because he's still really young and impressionable. I still want to get full custody because I honestly think he might be better off with me, but my ex-mother-in-law's words threw me off. AITA for wanting full custody of my son because my ex-wife attacked me in public over a petty fight we were having? Update 1. Okay, so I decided to go through with the petition to get full custody. I weighed out the pros and cons, and honestly, none of it mattered in the end after I spoke to my son. I asked him point blank if he would rather live with me full time than his mother, and he said that he wanted to live with me. When I asked him why, he told me that his mother wasn't around most of the time anyway, and he ended up spending most of the time with his nanny. He liked being with her, but he'd rather stay with me instead. Apparently his mother would be out with her boyfriend most of the time, and she'd forbid our son from complaining to me about it, so he hadn't told me a word of it so far. Even when she'd be at home, she'd bring her boyfriend with her and they'd spend most of their time together in the bedroom while he played by himself in the living room, and that's what really set me off. So many things could have gone wrong, and I'm thankful that they didn't. Whenever his mother was at home with her boyfriend, he didn't even have his nanny looking after him and was completely on his own during that time, which was dangerous. He didn't say it, but I could tell that our son felt neglected whenever he was at his mother's place, and that cemented my decision to get full custody. At the end of the day, what matters is whether our son is happy or not. And if he's happier with me, then he'll stay with me. It's as simple as that. Even if I kept my own conflicts with my ex-wife aside, there was no denying that she'd completely forgotten about her own son while chasing after her boyfriend, who apparently was so important that she couldn't spare even a second to look after our son. I shouldn't even have delayed the process, and I definitely should not have fallen for my ex-mother-in-law's manipulation. I bet this is her way to try and make up for her daughter for screwing up and giving me her location the other day. Otherwise, she probably would not have bothered herself with these things, because she's a woman who's usually really detached from whatever goes on with her daughter and didn't even seem to care much when we got divorced. Anyhow, I don't really care what she thinks or what her daughter thinks, because to me, nothing is more important than my son's happiness and health. And clearly that's not something my ex-wife cares about, so she can just go to hell. Update 2. It's been close to a week since the last update, and today my ex-wife was served. My son is still living with me, and his mom had the good sense not to question it so far. But after she came to know that I'd filed for full custody, she came right over to my house and demanded an explanation, as if this was a new development and I hadn't already told her about it. I refused to let her in, and instead I decided to threaten her with the cops, so she chose to go another way and stood right outside my yard to try and talk to me. I told her several times that there was no point. The petition had been filed and I wasn't going to take it back, but she was on her knees begging me to fix this and promising that she would get better somehow. It felt like crap to see her acting so desperate, but my hands were tied. My son was more important to me than her desperation. This went on for a while, but ultimately she left, sobbing like a child, and I was relieved to see her go, because I don't think I could have handled any more of that emotionally. She told me that her relationship was now over and she'd be able to devote all her time to being a mother, so our son had nothing to worry about. But it didn't matter, it was too late. Our son had been feeling neglected for weeks now, and she'd made him feel scared enough to not rat her out initially, but he cracked when I asked him about how he was treated by his mother. The poor kid had become so good at masking his real emotions that I'd believe he was excited to go to his mom's house and would be very happy around her, because that's how he used to act. I probably should have asked him about it earlier, but I didn't, because I used to think it was all good. It wasn't, and I'm only realizing that now. If anything, my ex-wife's hysterical behavior today just made sure that I knew I was doing the right thing, because she was acting so insane that I felt awful, even though I, a grown adult, had to witness that. Let alone the toll that kind of reckless behavior would have on a 6-year-old. He was napping at the time, so he didn't see or hear what was going on, and I'm thankful for that, because it was hard on me. And I wouldn't want to have to explain that to him as well, and that would have been a lot harder. Update 3. My ex-wife and I are supposed to meet for mediation tomorrow. It's the one that's court mandated before this ends up going to court, but I'm still nervous. My son has been living with me ever since the altercation with my ex-wife, and he says he misses her, but not enough to go back to her, evidently. I've asked him a bunch of times about who he'd rather live with, and he keeps telling me, so I'm relieved that he's made up his mind, and I won't have to go against his will for my sake, because that'd make me feel a lot more selfish and heartless than I already have been. It's been tough on me, I won't lie, because the way my ex-wife had been behaving the last time I saw her has stayed with me. Her friends have also contacted me a couple of times to tell me that she's really upset and wants me to take it all back and cancel the custody modification case, but I can't do it. In good conscience, I just can't do that, because I know how she'd been neglecting our son whenever he was there. I know she's very torn up about this, but it's not my fault. And this whole guilt trip that she's trying to send me on is not going to work. I've already spoken to my lawyer, and he's reassured me several times that we have this in the bag. We have the proof of her attacking me at the restaurant. We have the note she'd left on her door on the day of the incident, intended to mess with me, and I have security footage from my cameras where we can clearly make her out shoving my son's belongings towards me aggressively whenever she'd come over to drop our son off. She'd push them towards me with such force that I'd sometimes end up taking a couple of steps back, so this aggression was not new. This hysteria wasn't new either, because even while we were married, there were several instances where she'd go completely out of control and act like she'd be possessed or something while we were fighting. It was terrifying, and I don't think the woman has ever been really and truly mentally balanced. So this whole joint custody arrangement had been a mistake right from the start. I should have known better. And now that I do know better, I'm taking my son out of a toxic environment so that he doesn't feel neglected or scared anymore. Update 4. Hey, I got full custody. My ex-wife still has visitation rights, but they have to be fully supervised. So that's okay with me. My son is happy, and I'm probably the happiest I've ever been. These last few weeks were extremely emotionally draining for me, and I'm looking forward to nothing more than just unwinding at home for a few days, working from home and spending some time with my son. My parents are also coming over to be there with us and help me out with the chores, because I've been really busy for the last couple of weeks and have kind of fallen behind, so my mother had been helping me out anyway. But now they're going to be living with us for a few days, so they also get to spend time with their grandson. Things are going well now. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.